Some stories are forbidden for a reason, but we aren't afraid to tell them. Step into the world of the taboo and the unknown, where every secret has a dangerous price tag. Subscribe now and explore the forbidden truths of our world.
He took everything from me, my work, my reputation, my future, and then he laughed about it at our mother's retirement party while I stood in the corner with a glass of wine I couldn't even taste. That's what I told my therapist 2 years ago. She wrote something down in her notebook, looked up at me over her glasses, and said, "And what did you do next?" I told her I smiled and walked away. She wrote something else down. I think about that moment a lot now. Not because I'm still hurt by it. I'm not, or at least not in the way I used to be. But because that smile, that small, quiet, dignified smile, I managed to hold on my face while my brother stood 20 feet away taking credit for the biggest project of my career, turned out to be the first brick in the foundation of everything that came after. My name is Claire. I'm 41 years old. I'm a structural engineer, which means I spend most of my professional life figuring out what holds things up and what brings them down. Buildings, bridges, load-bearing walls. There's a precision to it that I've always loved. The idea that if you do the math right, if you account for every variable, the structure will hold. It won't fail. It won't collapse on the people inside it. I used to think relationships worked the same way. I used to think family was the most load-bearing structure of all. My brother's name is Ryan. He's 44, 3 years older than me, and for most of my life he was my favorite person in the world. Growing up, he was the one who taught me to ride a bike in the driveway of our house in Columbus, Ohio. He was the one who sat outside my bedroom door the night I got my heart broken for the first time in 9th grade and slid a piece of paper under the door that said, in his terrible handwriting, "You're too good for him anyway." He was the one who drove 12 hours straight when our father had his first cardiac event 8 years ago, showing up at the hospital still in the clothes he'd been wearing when I called, eyes red from either crying or exhaustion, or both. He was my brother. He was supposed to be the person I could trust more than anyone. I keep reminding myself of who he was before, because it helps me make sense of how completely I didn't see what was coming. I'd been working at Hartfield & Associates for 11 years when the Meridian Center project came in. It was a mixed-use development in downtown Indianapolis, residential towers, retail space, a public plaza, a parking structure. And the budget was just under $400 million. The kind of project that defines a career, the kind of project that, if you lead it successfully, means you spend the next decade being introduced at conferences as the engineer behind Meridian. I was assigned as project lead. 3 years of my life went into that project. I'm not being dramatic when I say that. I mean it literally. I missed holidays. I missed my best friend's bachelorette weekend because I was in Indianapolis walking foundation sites in the rain. I missed my own birthday 2 years in a row. I built spreadsheets at 2 in the morning and woke up at 5 to answer emails from contractors and fell asleep on planes between site visits with my laptop still open in my lap. Ryan worked at the same firm. He'd joined Hartfield 4 years after me, which had felt natural at the time. I'd recommended him, vouched for him, told our department head that my brother was exactly the kind of detail-oriented, client-facing talent they were looking for. He was good at his job. I want to say that clearly because it matters. Ryan was genuinely good at his job. He had the kind of easy confidence in client meetings that I always had to work a little harder to project. He was charming. He remembered birthdays and kids' names, and the kinds of small personal details that make clients feel seen. He was also, it turned out, very good at waiting. I didn't realize what was happening until it was almost too late to matter. 6 months before the Meridian Center project was due for its final presentation, the one where we'd present the completed design package to the city's development committee, the one that would determine whether the project moved to construction, Ryan asked if he could take point on the client relationship side. He framed it as wanting to take something off my plate. He said I was stretched too thin. He said the clients, the Whitmore Group, had mentioned that they appreciated his communication style. He said it with so much warmth and apparent concern that I actually thanked him. I gave him access to everything. My design files, my structural calculations, my presentation materials. I copied him on every email. I included him in every meeting. I trusted him the way you trust someone who has known your whole life, who remembers who you were at 14 and 16 and 22, who you have never once had a reason to doubt. The final presentation was on a Tuesday in April. I woke up that morning with the specific kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing you've done the work. I showered, made coffee, put on the gray blazer I always wear to important presentations, and drove to the office. Ryan wasn't there when I arrived. He'd called in sick. I presented alone. It went well. It went better than well. Actually, it went the way you dream a presentation will go, with the clients leaning forward in their chairs and asking exactly the right questions and nodding in exactly the right questions and nodding in exactly the right places. When it was over, the lead partner at Whitmore shook my hand and said, "This is extraordinary work." I called Ryan on the drive back to the office to tell him how it went. He didn't answer. 3 weeks later, I found out why. Ryan had met privately with the partners at Hartfield, not our direct supervisors, but the founding partners, the ones who sign the checks and make the decisions about promotions and project credits, and he had presented them with a document. A summary of the Meridian Center project, a document that listed his name and only his name as the lead engineer. He had been building it for months. Quietly, carefully, the way you'd construct a load-bearing wall inside a structure that was already standing, invisible from the outside until it was the only thing holding the roof up. He told them I had been struggling, that the project had nearly gone off the rails twice, and that he'd stepped in to stabilize it. He had emails, selectively excerpted emails that he'd had access to because I had given him access, that made it look like I'd been making critical errors that he'd caught and corrected. He had testimonials from 2 junior engineers on the team who, I later learned, had been told by Ryan that I was going to leave the firm and that their futures at Hartfield depended on whose side they were on. I didn't find out all of this at once. I found it out in pieces, the way you discover structural damage. A crack here, a shift there, a door that suddenly won't close the way it used to. What I found out first was that I had been removed as lead on the Meridian Center project, effective immediately, and reassigned to a smaller municipal project in a suburb of Columbus that didn't require my experience level, and didn't come with any of the visibility that Meridian would have given me. What I found out second was that Ryan had been named lead. I sat in my car in the Hartfield parking garage for 45 minutes after that meeting. I didn't cry. I want to say that I cried, because it would make this story more satisfying in a certain way, but I didn't. I just sat there with my hands in my lap and felt the specific, nauseating vertigo of realizing that the person who had driven 12 hours to sit with you in a hospital waiting room was also capable of this. My first instinct was to fight. I went home that night and started pulling together documentation, my original files, my email timestamps, the design decisions that were clearly mine, the calculations in my own handwriting. I called a lawyer friend and described the situation. She listened carefully and then said, "You have a case, but it'll take time and it will cost you professionally before it ever helps you." She was right, and I knew she was right, but I wasn't ready to hear it yet. I filed a formal complaint with Hartfield's HR department. I documented everything I could, and then I waited. 2 months later, HR told me they had reviewed the situation and found no evidence of wrongdoing. Ryan had been thorough. I left Hartfield 3 weeks after that. Not because I was asked to, I want to be clear about that, but because I understood, with the precision that comes from spending a career thinking about structural integrity, that the building was compromised. You can repair a cracked wall. You cannot repair a foundation that was deliberately undermined by someone who knew exactly where the load points were. I took a position with a smaller firm in Cincinnati. It was a step down on paper, less visibility, smaller projects, a salary that was about 15% lower than what I'd been making. I told myself it was temporary. Some days I believed it. My mother's name is Patricia, and she retired from teaching that fall after 32 years in the classroom. The retirement party was at my aunt's house in Columbus, 70 people. Catered, the backyard strung with lights. My mother cried when they brought out the cake. I stood next to her and held her hand and tried to be fully present in a moment that was supposed to be only about her joy. Ryan arrived late, which I now recognize as a power move, though at the time I told myself it was just Ryan being Ryan. He walked in with his wife and his 2 kids and immediately became the center of the room, the way he always does, greeting everyone with the kind of easy warmth that I had once admired in him and now understood as something more calculated than it appeared. He found me near the drink table about an hour in. "Claire," he said my name the way you say the name of someone you've been meaning to apologize to but haven't gotten around to yet. A little careful. A little weighted. "Ryan," I said. He looked at me for a moment and then his expression shifted into something I can only describe as pity, which was worse than anything else he could have shown me. "How are things in Cincinnati?" There it was. "Good," I said. "Really good actually. That's great." He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they don't quite believe you. "I'm glad you landed somewhere. The transition had to be hard." The transition, as though I had simply failed to keep up and needed to be placed somewhere I could manage. "Meridian broke ground last month," he continued, and I watched him watch me for my reaction. "City Council approved the final construction permits. It's going to be something." "It is," I said. "The structural design is excellent." I held his gaze when I said it. Something moved across his face. Not guilt. I don't think Ryan experiences guilt the way most people do. But something more like recalibration. He'd expected me to flinch. I hadn't flinched. "We should catch up properly sometime," he said. "Sure," I said. He moved back toward the center of the party. I refilled my glass of sparkling water and spent the next 20 minutes talking to my mother's oldest friend about her garden and felt, strangely, lighter than I had in months. That was the beginning of the second year. The second year was quieter than the first. I did my work. I rebuilt my reputation in Cincinnati with the same methodical care I brought to every structural problem, one decision at a time, one project at a time, making sure everything I touched was exactly as good as I knew it could be. I stopped looking at Ryan's LinkedIn. I stopped checking the Meridian Center news coverage. I started sleeping again, and then I met Daniel. I met him at a professional development conference in Chicago. The kind of weekend event where you wear your name badge around your neck and eat mediocre hotel buffet breakfast and attend panels that are sometimes genuinely useful and sometimes make you wonder why you flew here for this. I was on a panel about sustainable infrastructure. Daniel was in the audience. He found me during the coffee break afterward and introduced himself with a handshake that was firm without being performative and said, "The point you made about redundancy planning, I've been thinking about that in a completely different context and I'd love to talk about it if you have a few minutes." His name was Daniel Okafor. He was 43, tall, quiet in a way that felt deliberate rather than absent. He ran a private investment firm called Okafor Capital, which focused on large-scale urban development projects. He had a habit of listening completely before he spoke that I found, after years of being talked over in conference rooms, almost disorienting in its attentiveness. We talked through the coffee break and through lunch, and then continued talking at dinner that night with a group of other conference attendees that thinned out over the course of the evening until it was just the two of us at a corner table, the restaurant nearly empty around us, both of us having completely forgotten we were tired. We dated long distance for 8 months. Chicago to Cincinnati isn't an impossible distance, but it requires intention. And intention turned out to be something Daniel had in extraordinary abundance. He drove down on weekends. I flew up. We talked every night, sometimes for 5 minutes, sometimes for 2 hours, always with the specific quality of attention that I had stopped expecting from people and had started hoping to stop needing. He asked me to marry him on a Tuesday, which I mentioned because it was not a special Tuesday. We were in my apartment in Cincinnati. He'd come down for the weekend and we were making pasta and he was grating Parmesan and he stopped and looked at me and said, "I want to do this for the rest of my life. Make dinner with you. Talk about load-bearing walls with you. Sleep in the same house as you. Will you marry me?" I said yes before he finished the sentence. We got married in the spring, small ceremony, close friends and family. My mother cried again. I didn't invite Ryan. I should say clearly, I didn't invite Ryan because I wasn't ready, not because I was trying to punish him. There's a difference, and it matters to me. I wasn't plotting anything. I wasn't laying the groundwork for anything. I was simply a woman who had been deeply hurt by her brother and wasn't yet at a place where she could sit across from him at a dinner table without the hurt getting in the way of everything else. Life moves in ways you don't plan for. This is something I know intellectually as an engineer. Systems interact in unexpected ways. Redundancies kick in where you didn't design them. Failures propagate along paths you didn't anticipate. But knowing it intellectually and living it are different things. 6 months after Daniel and I were married, his firm began evaluating a major acquisition. A construction and development company called Crestline Group had been struggling financially and was looking for an investment partner. Crestline was the company that had been contracted to build the Meridian Center. I didn't know this when Daniel first mentioned the acquisition. He came home one evening and said he'd had an interesting day. that there was a potential deal on the table, a mid-sized construction firm with a good portfolio but some cash flow problems that Okafor Capital thought could be restructured. He mentioned the name in passing. I felt something shift, very quietly, somewhere in my chest. I didn't say anything that night. I thought about it. And then the next morning I told Daniel everything, not to influence his decision. I want to be clear about that. But because I had committed to honesty with him in a way that meant I couldn't sit on that information. I told him about Hartfield, about the Meridian Center, about Ryan. He listened in the way he always listens, completely, without interrupting, and when I finished he was quiet for a long moment. Does this change how you feel about the acquisition? I asked. No, he said. The numbers are the numbers. But thank you for telling me. I'm not asking you to do anything about Ryan, I said. I know, he said. The acquisition moved forward over the next several months. It was, from a business perspective, a significant deal. Okafor Capital taking a substantial ownership stake in Crestline, restructuring the leadership, renegotiating several of their major contracts. It received coverage in several industry publications. Daniel's name was in those publications. My last name was in those publications because it was also my last name now. Ryan's annual review at Hartfield happened to coincide with the period when the Crestline acquisition was finalized. Hartfield had a partnership with Crestline. They were the engineering firm of record on the Meridian Center project, which meant they had a significant financial relationship with a company that my husband now substantially owned. I did not engineer this. I want to say that one more time because I need it to be true, and it is true. I did not engineer this. I married a man I loved. He made a business decision based on the merits of a deal. The intersection of those two facts with my brother's career was not something I designed, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't thinking about it when my mother called me on a Thursday evening in October and told me that the Hartfield partners wanted Ryan to recuse himself from the Meridian Center project leadership due to the conflict of interest created by the Crestline relationship. My mother's voice was very careful when she told me this. She'd heard it from my aunt, who'd heard it from Ryan's wife. There was a question underneath her careful voice that she wasn't quite asking directly. Claire, she said after she'd told me the news, did you know about this? I knew Daniel was acquiring a stake in Crestline, I said. I didn't know about the conflict of interest decision at Hartfield until right now. There was a pause. He's very upset, my mother said. I imagine he is, I said. Another pause. Claire, did you? She stopped, started again. I just want to understand what happened. Mom, I said gently. I married someone who was good at his job and ran his business well. That's what happened. She was quiet for a long moment. He's going to call you. He can call me, I said. Ryan called the next day. I almost didn't answer. I sat and watched my phone ring and thought about the parking garage at Hartfield where I'd sat with my hands in my lap, and the retirement party where he'd asked me how things were going in Cincinnati with that particular careful pity, and the 12-hour drive to the hospital when our father was sick. I thought about all of it at the same time, the way you sometimes have to hold contradictory things together because the truth of a person is never just one thing. I answered. Claire. His voice was different, not the confident, easy warmth of the retirement party. Tighter, more controlled. Ryan, I said, I need to understand what's happening. What do you mean, the Crestline thing? Daniel's firm, the conflict of interest ruling. A pause. Did you do this? I thought carefully about how to answer. Daniel acquired a stake in Crestline because it was a good business decision, I said. I told him about what happened at Hartfield. I didn't ask him to do anything about it, and he didn't. Any professional consequences that followed from that are between you and Hartfield. The silence on the other end was long enough that I thought the call had dropped. You told him, Ryan said finally. He's my husband. I told him everything. Another silence. I'm off the Meridian Center project, he said, and his voice had shifted into something that I had never quite heard from him before. Something flatter. More exposed. I heard, I said. I built that project. I let that sit there for a moment. I didn't argue. I didn't catalog the ways in which that statement was false. I just let it sit there in the space between us, where we both knew what it was. You built it with my work, I said finally. Not angrily, just clearly. He didn't say anything. Ryan, I said. I don't want you to lose your career. That was never what I wanted. But what you did to me had consequences, and some of those consequences took longer to arrive than others. I didn't cause them, I just didn't stand in their way. I heard him exhale. I'm sorry, he said. It was the first time he'd said it, straight out, no qualifications, no reframing. Just those two words. I didn't know what to do with them in that moment. They didn't fix anything. They didn't give me back the 3 years I'd spent on a project that then had my name erased from it. They didn't undo the specific humiliation of being reassigned to a municipal project in a Columbus suburb while my brother got his name in architecture magazines. But they were something. I hear you, I said. I'm going to need some time. Okay, he said. I'm going to need some time. Okay, he said. I mean real time, Ryan. Not a few weeks. I don't know how long. Okay, he said again. We hung up. I sat in the kitchen for a long time after that, looking out the window at the city. Daniel came home an hour later and found me still sitting there and put his hand on my shoulder without asking any questions, the way he does when he understands that what's needed isn't words. He apologized, I told him. How do you feel? He asked. I thought about it honestly, like someone who spent a long time carrying something very heavy and just put it down for a second, I said. And I don't know yet if I'm going to pick it back up. He sat down next to me and didn't say anything else, and that was exactly right. I've thought a lot since then about what I actually believe about forgiveness. I think the version we're sold, the clean, cinematic version where you forgive someone and feel light and free and the relationship is repaired and everyone learns their lesson. I think that version is a story we tell because the real version is harder to watch. The real version is slow and non-linear and doesn't have a scene where the music swells. The real version is my brother and I having a stilted phone call at Christmas that lasted 20 minutes and was mostly about our mother's health and ended with both of us saying we'd talk soon and not being sure if we meant it. The real version is me, on a Tuesday afternoon, pulling up the Meridian Center construction updates online and feeling something complicated. Pride and grief and anger, and something I don't have a clean word for. When I see the building going up, knowing that my calculations are in those walls, knowing that the structure will hold because I did the math right. The real version is choosing, slowly, carefully, not as an act of grace, but as an act of self-preservation, to stop letting what Ryan did be the thing that defines the architecture of my life. I'm a structural engineer. I know how to assess what's load-bearing and what isn't. What Ryan did to me is not load-bearing. It's a wall I can take down without the whole structure falling. I'm taking it down. It's slow work. But the building is still standing. And it is, if I'm being honest with myself, more beautiful than the one I thought I was building before. There's something I've come to understand about the way consequences work in real life versus the way we expect them to work. We want them to be swift. We want the person who hurt us to feel it immediately, visibly, in proportion to exactly what they did. We want the ledger balanced before we even walk out of the room. And when it doesn't happen that way, when the person who wronged us seems to be thriving, collecting the rewards of what they took, standing at a party accepting congratulations, we start to wonder if the ledger balances at all. I wondered that for a long time. I sat in a parking garage in Columbus and wondered it. I drove to Cincinnati and wondered it. I watched Ryan get his name in industry publications and wondered it so hard it kept me awake some nights. What I know now is that the ledger does balance. Not because the universe is watching with a clipboard, not because wrongdoing is punished by some external force that tracks these things. It balances because of something far more mechanical and far more certain than that. It balances because the choices we make shape the kind of person we become, and the kind of person we become determines the quality of everything we build going forward. Ryan built his advancement on a foundation he didn't lay. That's not a moral judgment, it's a structural one. A foundation you didn't lay is a foundation you don't fully understand. You don't know where the weak points are. You don't know what it costs to pour it. You don't know what it costs to pour it. You don't know what conditions it was designed to withstand. And so when the weight comes, and the weight always comes, you are not prepared for it in the way that the person who actually did the work would have been. Claire prepared for it every single day without knowing she was preparing. Every project she completed in Cincinnati that was smaller than what she deserved. Every morning she chose precision over bitterness. Every time she put her name on something and made sure it was as good as she knew how to make it. She was building something, brick by careful brick, that belonged entirely to her and could never be taken away because it lived inside her skill and her integrity and her refusal to become smaller than what had been done to her. That is what I want you to take from this story, not the satisfaction of the twist, though I understand why that's satisfying, because it is. But underneath the twist is something more important. The reason Dano was who he was, the reason Claire's life became what it became, had nothing to do with luck and everything to do with the kind of person she had spent years quietly choosing to be. Trustworthy people find each other. People who do honest work attract honest work back to them. This is not magic. This is just the long arithmetic of character, working itself out over time. And for Ryan, I don't tell this story to destroy him. I tell it because I think there is something instructive in what happened to him too. The moment you stop doing your own work and start feeding on someone else's, you stop growing. You stop learning what you're actually capable of. You trade the real development of your own abilities for the appearance of having abilities you don't fully own. That trade feels like a win in the short term. Over time, it hollows you out in ways that eventually become impossible to hide. Claire is still working on forgiving her brother. She may not get all the way there, and that would be okay. Forgiveness is not something you owe the person who hurt you. It is something you do, slowly and imperfectly, for yourself. Because carrying the weight of what someone else did to you is its own kind of load-bearing wall. And sometimes the most structurally sound decision you can make is to take it down.